On a stormy night, terrifying lightning struck the ground. A man was walking through the rain and wind. Seeing a small temple, he immediately ran to take shelter. The strong wind kept blowing. The basket of vegetables standing in front of the door toppled over. The green vegetables inside were scattered all over the ground. Another thunderclap struck. The light from the lightning illuminated the entire house. The man could see all the scenes inside. Then he fell to the ground in fear and cried out, "Mom!" His face was so pale that there was no more blood left. What caught his eye was a broken face full of diagonal slashes, covered in blood, and next to it was another corpse in a twisted position, being carried around, blood flowing all over the ground. The man was terrified and crawled back, screaming, "Yes, someone died." He used all his strength to run away, rushed into the storm, continued to scream. There was a monster eating people. The heavy rain and wind still showed no signs of stopping. Lightning streaked across the sky, making people's hair stand on end. The man ran for a while and saw a group of soldiers walking towards him. He ran in panic. Pointing towards the house not far away, he cried out in fear. After going to the mountain to pick medicine, the monks and villains came here to rest. It was unimaginable. This time, they actually encountered such a scene. Such a terrifying sight. The leader of the figure heard this. His eyes were red and he waved his hand to order, "Go inside to take a look." When the man saw that this group of people were planning to go inside, he worriedly said, "Sir, don't you really need to go find a Taoist to come and take a look?" The wind was really strong, but it actually broke a series of big trees around. The first figure moved forward and said coldly, "No need. Let the soldiers go in and search for a while." Then a person holding a sword in the rain ran out and shouted, "Sir, we found this in the corner of the temple." After hearing the report, the first figure turned around in satisfaction and said, "Okay, this is evidence, clean up the scene, and take the body to the cemetery." The soldiers behind quickly shouted in response. In the prison, a small mouse crawled out of nowhere to steal a bowl of water. A heavy sigh made the mouse startle, alertly looking at Live Antam lying on a layer of straw. The mouse slowly crawled onto Live Antam's toes. He still didn't know anything and lay still, closing his eyes tightly, wringing his hands in A horrifying scene suddenly appeared, a mouth with thousands of crowded fangs growing inside. This mouth stuck out a long, disgusting tongue, and a hand with sharp claws was also reaching out. Grab the prey. The mouse suddenly changed, its eyes turned red like blood, baring its sharp teeth and biting into the truth of the heart. He was in pain and suddenly screamed and sat up. The mouse returned to its original appearance and immediately curled up and ran away. Live Antam's right hand had a deep cut. He raised the foot that had just been bitten, frowned and said, "The rats in this prison are also really cruel, even daring to gnaw on humans, fortunately. The object is still here." Live Antam took out a piece of jade slip, held it tightly in his hand and contemplated. "Because of this, I was chased and killed by those two Taoists." It was a stormy, rainy night. Two Taoist monks showed fierce faces with sharp swords in their hands chasing Live Antam. He hid inside a small temple, right behind the Buddha statue. Two vigilant Taoists entered and looked around. But at this moment, a red eye suddenly peeked in from outside the door, and the whole temple was immediately engulfed in a blood-red color. The two Taoists were startled and turned their heads to look, and were immediately sucked in by a long tongue. Live Antam slightly poked her head out. Seeing this scene, her eyes widened in horror. Outside the temple, a giant monster with a slimy body held the hands of two Taoist monks who were constantly struggling. Its hideous tongue flowed out a stream of greedy saliva. After dealing with these two Taoist monks, the monster was satisfied and slowly disappeared into the deep forest. Waiting for the monster to leave for a while, Live Antam, holding the wound in her hand, immediately left the temple. Running through the heavy rain for a long distance, in front of Live Antam was the city gate. He was completely exhausted at this point and immediately fell to the ground. The guards saw this and rushed out to investigate. Freed from the terrible memories, Live Antam with a bruised face frowned and thought, "How divine is that monster?" At this moment, a step sounded outside the room. Live Antam's eyes widened, happily shouting, "Sir, you are back. I did not lie to you, it is truly love." Freaking chaos. The person who just arrived was the first person to come to the temple just now. He looked at Live Antam with cold eyes and said, "Well, everything is clear." Hearing that, Lai Van Tam breathed a sigh of relief and said, "That's great, I said I was innocent." Before he could finish his sentence, the cold voice interrupted him. He said, "You are a prisoner." Lai Van Tam couldn't believe his ears. He let out a sigh, then raised his sweaty face to look at the person outside the cell, only to see him holding up a sword and asking, "Does this sword look familiar?" "We found it at the scene." Lai Van Tam was confused and asked again, "What does this mean?" The first figure stared at the deep wound on Lai Van Tam's hand, cutting the nail and cutting the iron, and said, "You have a wound caused by a sword on your body, and you are carrying a sword similar to this one. Clearly you killed someone to take the sword. To hide your sin, you destroyed the corpse." Lai Van Tam, who was wrongly accused, quickly grabbed the cell door, opened his mouth and said loudly, "How could a normal person make the scene become like that?" "Normal person?" the first figure asked again in doubt, then pointed at the table next to him, said in a harsh voice, "Look, we found these things on you. You are the artist of the evil sect. Magic." He picked up a shelter talisman, glanced at Lai Van Tam, then continued to say, "You are using these things to create the illusion of demons killing people." Lai Van Tam suddenly choked and couldn't say anything. The first figure had now turned away. He said faintly, "The inference was reasonable. The punishment would soon be imposed. Stop that pointless struggling." Lai Van Tam looked at the back of that person leaving, then he leaned down on his hands and bowed his head, his hands clenched into fists, his eyebrows furrowed, and he thought to himself, "In such a rush to blame me, could it be that he wanted to find someone? Is this a substitute goat to end the case early? Those two dead Taoists died miserably, the temple was destroyed, and after just one day, they convicted me. Even if I had the greatest suspicion, I couldn't close it. Such an incident is possible. Perhaps there is some hidden meaning behind this incident. Can't sit and wait for death." Lai Van Tam gritted his teeth and said, "You follow me? It's your destiny. I beat you, it's your destiny." The skinny teenager with a bruised face was sitting huddled in a corner of the house, listening to his father's scolding. This father was a heavy drinker, drunk all day long. He held a bottle of wine in his hand and pointed straight at the young man's face, continuing to say, "I will teach you your bravery. Whether you can learn a lot or a little, is also your destiny. You." As fate would have it, on a cloudy day with pouring rain, the father, who was always drunk, lay under the car, blood flowing all over the ground, and the bottle of wine was rolling around next to him. Looking at his father's altar photo, the young man frowned and thought with some pain, "This is also destiny." In an abandoned high-rise building, a young man wearing an employee ID card around his neck was tied tightly to a chair, his face obscured by a piece of white cloth, looking like a kidnapping. Each sound of footsteps echoed on the tile floor. A loud shout rang out, "Hey, it's time to eat." Inside the prison, Lai Van Tam was startled to wake up from his dream. His eyes opened wide to look at the prison guard standing outside the cell. He heard him continue, "Your luck is good. Your first image is special. I order you to eat some delicious food." Lai Van Tam slowly sat up. His head was still a bit dizzy from the dream that had just happened. He put his hands on his knees and thought, his previous life had been miserable since he was a child. If he hadn't been adopted by that old man, he would have been miserable. I was afraid that I would have frozen to death on the street. Later, when I studied psychology, I struggled to survive until I graduated, but the old man was killed by a snake, even though it took 10 years to recover. Revenge. I can no longer live like a normal person. I thought I could live a peaceful life, but the result is still entangled in trouble. Seeing the people in the cell keep their eyes open and staring, the prison guard who brought the food shouted again, "What are you looking at? Eat quickly, no one knows what your next meal will be like." Looking at the food tray with a mantou and a bowl of thin porridge being pushed in, Lai Van Tam raised his eyes and asked, "Sir, if it's the last meal, it doesn't have to be this bad." When the prison guard heard him say that, he shouted in contempt. In prison, he still wanted to choose between 3 and 4, which was fine. Saying that, he closed the door and left. Lai Van Tam looked at the door and suddenly felt a little surprised when the outside lock was only loosely installed, but not completely locked. He wondered, "This door is just for me. Is it because he wants me to escape from prison? See? So there's no judgment here, good or bad. We want to fill ourselves up a bit. Anyway, this mantou is at least tastier than those rancid bowls of soup." He just put the mantou in his mouth and chewed it deliciously, talking all the time, but there wasn't any boiled water. The two prison guards guarding outside saw that there was no movement inside and looked around impatiently. One person asked, "What is he mumbling?" The other person immediately replied, "I don't know. Maybe he didn't see the prison door. It's a shame I had to work hard to close it." When the other person heard that, he scoffed and acted too much. Waiting for a long time but the person inside still didn't do anything, the two prison guards began to worry. Did this kid pretend to be stupid and didn't see that? Should I warn him or not? Don't let him get suspicious. After finishing the man-2, Lai Van Tam lay down on the straw, rubbing her stomach and thinking, "It seems they have decided to get me out of this prison, instead of letting them come up with tricks. The plot is more cunning, not as scheming as before. However, the script will not turn out as well as they expected." Thinking for a while, he fell asleep without realizing it. Outside, the two prison guards couldn't wait any longer and ran in to see this. Seeing this scene, they angrily exclaimed, "Mom, go to sleep again, eat this walnut." Seeing that his teammate could not contain his anger, the other person quickly patted his shoulder to reassure him, "Don't be impatient. I invite you to drink some wine." The time soon turned to the next day, the fourth watch, the cold winter sky, the falling snowdrops added to the coldness. In the prison, two prison guards were drunk together, sleeping. Z. 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 At this time, Lai Van Tam started to act. He gently pushed the door of the cell open, went to the table next to him, picked up all his shelter charms, and carefully put them in his shirt. He went to the two sleeping guards, shook one of them, then leaned into his ear and said, "Please wake up. I want to escape from prison." This prison guard opened his eyes sleepily and said, "Let's do it. I can't pretend about this." Outside the prison, many soldiers were waiting in ambush in a small forest. One soldier said suspiciously, "Why haven't you come out yet? Did something happen inside?" Hearing that, he shook his head. Dai replied, "There was no rush. Wait until he came out, then use the knife as quickly as possible to eliminate him, avoiding causing a big commotion that would make people suspicious." Immediately after this statement, a figure crept out from the prison. Seeing this, the first figure quickly drew his sword and rushed forward, shouting the words "Capture." The person who had just come out saw this scene and trembled, raised his hands and shouted loudly, "Baby, it's me." The first figure recognized the prison guard, angrily grabbed his collar and shouted, looking straight at me, "What are you doing out here?" The prison guard was scared and quickly said, "It was that kid who called me out." Speaking of this, Lai Van Tam leisurely walked out from inside. He waved his hand and said, "Sir, you didn't handle this matter very well, so you should find me to take the blame for it. But if that monster appears and kills people again, it's even more certain that you're useless. It's best to completely solve this problem." When the first figure heard this, he frowned and asked again, completely resolved, "Do you have a solution, kid?" "I do have a few ways," Lai Van Tam shrugged and said, "Afraid that the master will be scared to death by that monster, he doesn't even dare to try." He stopped for a moment, looked straight into his eyes and asked seriously, "Have you ever met that guy before?" When he heard that, he was startled and quickly asked again, "Who are you?" "Who am I? As you can see, I'm just a small artist." Lai Van Tam looked away at the small forest and silently said, "If you count your past life, you would still be a psychiatrist." The first figure seemed to hear this. He let out a confused sound. Lai Van Tam quickly waved his hand and said, "It's okay, sir. Why don't you continue talking about that monster?" The first figure raised his eyebrows, his red pupils shone coldly, and said in a low voice, "If you really count your past life, you would still be a psychiatrist. Can you really help me deal with that monster?" Lai Van Tam walked past the figurehead. He clutched a scroll in his hand, said seriously, "If you don't believe me, you can kill me, but if you go to the end of the village, there won't be any more shops left, if you love me." That monster appeared again. He hesitantly said this, but he didn't want to think too much anymore, quickly waved his hand and ordered you to protect all around. The soldiers behind heard the order and immediately responded clearly. Lai Van Tam now walked to a tree, bowed his head and sat down. 3 months ago, the district's young master went missing on a hunting trip. The only old man still alive said there was a monster eating people. Spreading out the white roll of paper in his hand, he continued thoughtfully, "I suspect that thing is it." The first image interrupted Lai Van Tam's words. He raised his eyebrows tightly, remembering what happened in the past, and said darkly, "The first time I met him was 5 years ago. That day there was thunder and lightning, The wind was very strong. I had just had a son. The sound of a baby crying resounded in the warm little house. The head figure picked up the baby to comfort him. Good boy, don't cry anymore. Right at this moment, the candles in the house were blown out by the storm outside. The couple, pictured above, held the baby tightly in their arms, looking out through the wooden window. Just at that moment, a blood-red eye suddenly appeared in front of the two of them. The wife exclaimed in fear, What kind of monster is that?" This monster said nothing, immediately sucked the crying baby in its head-shaped arms and pulled it out. Seeing this, the wife quickly grabbed the baby, and also frantically looked for a weapon. But it was all too late. Both mother and child were grabbed and pulled high by the monster. It took the form of a human, red eyes and long hair flowing behind its head. The monster opened its mouth full of hideous sharp teeth, swallowing both mother and child inside in one breath. Remembering the images from the past, the painful figure said, "That monster ate them right before my eyes." Hearing him say that, Lai Van Tam recalled the appearance of the monster he had seen before, lifted the pen to draw on the scroll. He frowned and thought, "It turns out that in front of me, I also like to be seen eating people. This monster's mentality is really perverted. But this monster cannot predict people's hearts." Dotting the last stroke, the monster's appearance completely appeared on the paper. He looked up and asked the first image, "See if it was it or not." The first picture just looked at the drawing and exclaimed in shock, "Yes, that's it. Now what can I do to force it to appear?" When Lai Van Tam heard that, he shook his head and said, "I don't know anymore. This is very difficult to judge. But for a family, the most important thing is to have enough people." "Huh? What do you mean?" the first figure asked suspiciously. "What I mean is," when Lai Van Tam said this, he stood up, opened his mouth and blew into the painting at his feet. A demon identical to the monster in the drawing rushed out, roaring towards the head figure. Lai Van Tam coldly said in the back, "You should reunite with your family soon." "What?" The first figure saw this scene and gritted his teeth and pulled out his sword. The surrounding soldiers shouted in panic, "Old man, kill him! Kill him quickly!" The soldiers guarding from all four directions immediately turned around and joined the head to kill the demon. A long while later, the first figure's blade slashed the demon's body, revealing its original form as the drawing scroll from earlier. Figure Dai shouted angrily, "That guy dares to trick us, quickly chase him." Lai Van Tam had now rushed deep into the forest. He ran and thought, "In this life, I am really just an artist, all things are invisible, heaven and earth have souls, practitioners can read books or paintings to turn the invisible into soul." Remembering the image of when my father taught me how to draw as a child, with just a few strokes of the pen, a small pile of rice appeared on the paper. The boy exclaimed excitedly, "How could father do that?" The father looked at his son affectionately and said, "Bringing all things and people into paintings, from vast rivers and mountains to small things, only painters can do that. Do you want to learn? Wait until your son grows up. I will teach you." Freed from memories of the past, Lai Van Tam gritted his teeth and said, "Unfortunately, when I grew up, my father seemed to have forgotten and never mentioned it again, if it weren't for me coming back into my soul and stealing lessons from my teacher. I don't know what will happen now, those two damn Taoists, if it wasn't for the sea of gas being sealed by them, I wouldn't have used any tricks on that group of people." He had only been running for a while when he suddenly almost crashed into a soldier right in front of him. This guy saw this and quickly shouted, "Found it, old man, here." "It's over," Lai Van Tam thought. There were soldiers coming from all four sides, surrounding him in the middle. The first figure slowly appeared from behind, pointed his finger and shouted angrily, "Keep running, I'll see how far you can run." Lai Van Tam was surrounded and leaned against a tree, holding his injured arm and speaking calmly. It seemed that the master was very angry. The first figure said in a cold voice, "Brat, you dare to deceive me." He raised the knife and pointed it straight at his neck, angrily shouting, "Still thinking that you could escape?" Lai Van's heart was sweating. He slightly threw his head back and said with wide eyes, "Who said I lied to you? Isn't he here? Do you see that I will be fooled again?" The first figure angrily waved his sword. But right at this moment, a hurricane arose, and the birds and animals in the forest were afraid to fly out. The surrounding soldiers seemed to be influenced by someone, falling left and right all over the ground. The knife in the head-shaped hand somehow got chipped off. An owl on a tree suddenly opened its mouth to scream loudly. its head startled in fear, and saw several dead bodies of soldiers falling to the ground. Behind him, a red shirt appeared at some unknown time, hiding behind a canopy of trees. The figure's head trembled and did not dare to move. Lai Van Tam quickly reassured him and said, "Don't be afraid, turn your head to see if it's him." The first image was very cautious. He pressed one hand on Lai Van Tam's body, then raised his knife and turned back to shout, "You have accomplices. Come out, come out, stop pretending to be a ghost." As soon as these words ended, a light laugh rang out, followed by a leisurely man walking out, holding a yellow folding fan in his hand, his long hair flowing down his back. The man spoke, "We met again." Already, remembering the image of his wife and children being swallowed whole, the first figure stammered in horror, "Monster, does he still remember me?" Lai Van Tam was pressed against the tree trunk behind him, his face sweating, and said, "I don't mind doing the same thing twice. Last time you saved my life. This time I really have no choice but to invite you again." This. Pausing for a moment, he smiled and continued to say, "Please save my life again." Hearing him say that, his head turned back and forth between the two of them, questioningly exclaiming, "Do you guys know each other?" The man who just appeared waved his fan and laughed a few times, leisurely saying, "It seems he was correct in not eating you last time. What an interesting thing." Hearing this, Lai Van Tam curled his lips and said, "I have a relationship with young Master 9. The first image heard these two people. You said one word to me in one sentence, and shouted in anger, 'You are accomplices.' As expected, I did not see wrong." Lai Van Tam didn't bother to pay attention to these words. He lowered his head slightly and suddenly couldn't see his expression clearly. He thought to himself, "This bet is right." Remembering the previous image, in the small temple, this man called 9 Young Master held in his hand the stripped-skinned arm of a certain Taoist monk, bared his sharp teeth and glanced at him, asking, "Little guy, aren't you afraid?" Lai Van Tam hugged his injured arm and calmly said, "Don't be afraid. If it weren't for you, I would have died in the hands of those two Taoists. I didn't know your noble character. When I return, I will build a statue of you. Worship Day." Young Master 9 heard these words and frowned as if thinking about something. A moment later he burst into laughter, bared his fierce teeth and said, "You're so interesting. Okay, just call me Master 9. Already, freed from past images, Lai Van Tam thought to herself, even though she didn't know why he spared her at that time, if she knew his name, she could borrow a little of his spiritual power when painting him. A demon with great magical powers like him can indeed detect that even if he tells a tiger to shed its skin, but with him here, as long as he still has no intention of eating me, I will be fine. Thinking of this, the 9th Young Master on the opposite side spoke again, "Didn't you say you would build a statue to burn incense for me? Where is the statue? Where is the incense?" When Lai Van Tam heard that, he felt guilty and burst out laughing. He still hadn't found a place to stop and was locked up in prison. "These days I haven't been able to eat or sleep well, thinking about you every day. Today it is not easy to have the opportunity to paint your statue, but in the end I am bothering you to come here and save my life." Hearing him say that, the angry figure pointed his sword at his face and shouted, shut up, don't come over here, otherwise I will kill him." When young Master 9 heard these words, he curled his lips and said, "He is using you to threaten me. He wants to kill you." Lai Van Tam didn't bother to pay attention. He laughed bitterly and said contemptuously, "Ha, this person is very weak. I thought that after seeing you, he must have a few bones." He looked straight at the figure and shouted, "The hatred of killing his wife and children is right in front of you. You only dare to raise your knife at me, but you still want to run away." Hearing that, the first figure roared in anger, "Shut up, and if you say more, I will kill you." Ignoring him, Lai Van Tam continued to speak, "I won't say. Can you rest assured, when your wife and children were killed, you could only stand and watch, like a cowardly dog. You killed me. If I die, you will die too, but if you continue to be a coward today, you won't be able to live. Are you very scared right now? Do you want to run away? Do you want to survive?" These words touched the deepest part of his heart, scratching and biting the wound he had always buried, exposing the fear deeply engraved in his heart to the outside, making him look like he was going crazy. She was drenched in sweat and shouted, No, I don't have it." Lai Van Tam still refused to give up, continued to say, "Ha, no, someone like you is not even sure how to hold a knife, let alone kill him. Don't think about anything. Kill him. This is the moment, come on, kill him. Kill him. Live Antam's words were like hypnosis, creeping into his mind, his body trembling even more intensely. After a long while, he suddenly grasped the sword, rushed straight towards young Master Ju, shouting, "I will kill you." The first figure let out a scream and then rushed to where the 9 young master was standing. The 9 young master did not bother to move. He folded the fan, waved his hand. A sharp stream of spiritual energy slashed straight towards the figure's head, instantly causing blood to splash. The blade of the knife fell with a clang, and the dead head instantly fell right at the feet of the 9th master. He looked up at the boy sitting under the tree and asked, interestingly, how did he do that? Live Antam blinked and replied, just a little trick. Since I stepped out of the prison, I have influenced his thoughts, ruined his plans, talked to him. His memories, that disaster, the night air, followed the scent of blood, until you appeared, ruining his plans one by one, making him uneasy step by step. Worried, angry, scared, hyperventilating, not knowing what to do. In the end, every word I said forced his breathing, not giving him a chance to calm down at all. In the end I was able to calm down. Pointing out to him a vague path, he immediately obeyed and died in the hands of young Master Ninth, and death was also good. He could reunite with his family as he wished. Saying this, he narrowed his eyes, smiled and praised one last sentence, "You are truly a good person." Hearing these words, young Master Ninth bowed down slightly from above and stared at Live Antam's face. "Good guy, ha 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 ha. Interesting, very interesting. This is the first time someone has told me that, such an interesting person. I really want to taste it and see what it tastes like." Live Antam sat there, curled his mouth and said, "If you want to taste it, taste it. But there aren't many people like me. You should eat sparingly. This time you just came out of the big prison. It's not convenient. If you eat next time I'll give you a little more seasoning." "You really are." The 9th young master bared his sharp teeth. He tapped the fan in his hand and laughed a few times, then spread the fan to cover his mouth and said faintly, "You owe me your life." After saying that, young Master 9 turned into a puff of smoke. Before completely disappearing, he left a reminder, "I will find you. If you make me bored, I will eat you." Waiting for young Master 9 to leave, Live Antam breathed a sigh of relief. He raised his head to look at the cold bright moon above, finally alive. Live Antam leaned her back against the tree and told herself that last spring, her parents died in a storm because of an unexpected accident. Originally, I planned to follow the rules of this world and stay home and pay filial piety for 3 years. But 9 days ago, 2 Taoists came to stay. Each of them had souls, either strong or weak. In the small house, next to a flickering candle, Dan Than Taoist Chi Tung Tu stroked his beard and explained that we cultivators need to mobilize the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to use, and need a strong enough soul. As for the method of cultivating the soul, in fact, as simple as it sounds, it is saving lives. After passing through the tribulation, Live Antam asked again in doubt. Dan Than Taoist Kan Thung Tu explained, although it sounds very simple, when overcoming tribulations the soul is not strong enough, due to the impact of external objects. If you are distracted when using it, you will bite yourself back. However, everything is created by fate, and if we had the fame and power of ancient masters, it would be much simpler. When they stayed for the 3rd day, they finally couldn't help but reveal their true colors. I don't know where they heard it from, saying that in my father's hand there was a book left behind by Taoist Dan King thousands of years ago, the map of thousands of miles of mountains and rivers. But they didn't know what they left behind was the legendary flower Great Tantra, Smart Jade Slip, escaped for just 7 days, on that fateful rainy night. Live Antam fled into the small temple, hiding behind a statue. 2 Taoist monks chased after him and shouted, "Come out, I know you're hiding there." I was originally going to die at that time, but because of a demon who likes to eat people, I turned the danger into safety. Saying this, Live Antam sat up on his hands and walked towards the corpse of the first figure in front. He reached into his body and pulled out a few gold bars. Storing it carefully in his shirt, Live Antam turned his head to look at the corpse and exclaimed. Along the way, he was chased by people, but was saved by a demon. How strange. He gradually disappeared in the small forest, only a low voice remained, not knowing if the next time we met again, he would still be able to make a mess of it. I don't know how much time has passed. A person went into the forest to chop wood when he suddenly stepped on a puddle of water. This person bent down to look carefully. This was not water but fresh blood. Under the cold moonlight, countless corpses appeared. Soldiers' bodies were lying around here. This person ran away in fear, screaming, "Oh my God! Psy family, this is all Psy family. What is this? How did I encounter this matter? Taoist, this time we must find the Taoist." Early the next morning, in another part of the forest, a group of soldiers slowly walked forward. The leaders are an old man and a young girl. Suddenly a greeting rang out, followed by Lai Van Tam waving his hand asking for help. He narrowed his eyes and smiled and said, "Can I give him a ride?" They were all people walking in the rivers and lakes, returning safely after half a year of wandering in the rivers and lakes. All of them were people in the gang, driving the carriage forward while shouting in unison. The old man driving the horse-drawn carriage was the head of this department. His face was red. His face exuded a kind of power that made anyone who looked at him a little afraid. On a horse-drawn carriage, Ku Jia Han's daughter Ku Donhong propped her chin up, looked at Lai Van Tam and asked, "Why are you alone in this wild place?" "Originally, my father wouldn't let a living person join the group. I'm afraid secret agents sent by mountain bandits." Hearing that, Lai Van Tam immediately turned to look at Ku Jia Han and asked, "Do I look like a thief?" Ku Jia Han opened her eyes wide and looked at him until her face turned red, then quickly turned her head away and said, "No, there is no such handsome thief." Lai Van Tam found it quite interesting, so he continued to tease her, "Yes, in fact I am a monster in the mountains and wilds." Hearing that, Ku Jia Han snorted and said, "What about monsters? We have Taoists here. They will capture you." Old Taoist Lu sat next to him with his arms crossed, listening to these two people talking about him. Then he faintly interrupted, "Don't make fun of the old Taoist. My job is not to subdue demons." Hearing that, Lai Van Tam turned his head and noticed that the old monk was wearing it on his back and asked, looking at the drawing instrument that the senior was carrying, "Was he Dan Than Taoist?" Old man Lu let out a loud noise and nodded and said, "Your eyes are also a bit clear. You know the mysterious sect, don't you?" Without letting Li Van Tam answer, the Taoist continued to say, "The poor Taoist is the sect leader of the Dong Xuan sect." Hearing him say that, Lai Van Tam's eyes lit up and exclaimed, "Senior can lead an entire sect, so he is definitely a noble person." Ku Jia Han said contemptuously next to him, "Don't believe him. He is the only one in his mysterious cave. He is a scam artist." Old Taoist Lu heard that and was equally angry and shouted, "You said I was a fraud. Poor Taoist, I really have the ability." Ku Jia Han shrugged and said, "Do you have the skills?" Old Dao Lu gritted his teeth and scolded. The poor Dao said, "Painters don't catch demons." Before he could stop, Ku Jia Han continued to provoke her. "Ha! That's no bravery. In the city, I once saw someone drawing a drawing for a girl in the Red House, doing magic tricks to seduce people." Wrong. Nonsense. When did the poor man do that? Old man Lu clenched his fist and shouted loudly. Lai Van Tam, in the middle, had difficulty stopping the two people from getting into a fight. At this moment, Ku Donhong came from nowhere, picked up Ku Jia's neck, and said in a serious voice, "When did you come to the Hong Lao? Is that a place where a young lady can come?" Ku Jia Han quickly yelled and scolded him. "Dad, don't be like that here. I'm already 15. You can't go even 15, he said and pulled Ku Jia Han straight out of the carriage. She screamed in fear, "Father, please listen to my explanation." The two people sitting in the carriage looked at this scene and laughed happily. Waiting for the couple to let the Ku family go away, Lai Van Tam quickly turned back to look at the Taoist and said, "Master, please tell me about the painter's story." Lao Taoist Lu looked at the bright eyes of the young man in front of him, stroked his beard, and began to speak. "Listen here. This poor Taoist has been skilled for 36 years, and is also somewhat famous in the city, seeing that you and I have fate. The poor man will tell you a little bit. Cultivators have 5 realms: mystery, truth, transformation, emptiness, and mind. For painters, reaching the realm of mind can evoke spiritual energy, integrate into the painting, and affect the 5 senses and fortune of the person. When entering the virtual realm, you can condense air into a shape that can deceive others, and transform into a realm that can summon things." Hearing this, Lai Van Tam wondered and asked, "What about the true realm and the illusory realm?" Old Taoist Lu sighed and bowed his head slightly to continue. Until now, the painter's path was going downhill, and the painter of the virtual realm had to go to the capital to meet him. I don't know if there are masters in the realm of transformation or not to mention the mystical and true realms, but there are no more than 5 master painters in the entire realm. I am one of them. A mortal master is truly a noble person, Lai Van Tam blurted out. Old man Lu sat to the side, stroking his beard, thinking, I'm the only one in the temple. He believes in me, so how about accepting him? The kid is so right. He can still support. He can still work trivia. Isn't that great? Lai Van Tam also has his own thoughts. Although this old man is very weak, he is still a painter. Wherever he goes in the future, he can use his identity to support him and have a place to stop. Just thinking of this, Lao Taoist suddenly turned around and said seriously, young man, I see that you and I are destined, and you want to seek enlightenment. Before he could finish his sentence, Lai Van Tam felt as if he had opened his heart, immediately knelt down and bowed his head and said, Master, please accept a bow from the disciple. Ku Jia Han was riding a horse next to her and looking at this scene, her eyes widened and she wanted to fall out. She cried out in horror, I just left a moment ago. How come I have already become a disciple? My little brother has become a Taoist priest. A fat man riding a horse next to her heard her say that and sarcastically said, looking like that, the result is a senseless guy. Ku Jia Han shouted angrily, you are the ignorant one. Walking forward for a while, it was already dark. Ku Don Hong found an empty piece of land and raised his hands high to shout, camp and rest. Letting a few people from Tu Bureau set up camp, Lai Van Tam took the opportunity to get water to drink by a stream. Ku Jia Han walked to the side and softly called, Lai Chu brother. Lai Van Tam turned around and replied, what's wrong? You also came to get water. Ku Jia Han waved his hand and said, no, I wanted to come and tell you, don't let old Taoist Lu fool you. That old man is very ugly. He also likes to act to deceive young ladies, sisters. I'm not talking bad about others behind their backs. You're not a little lady, I'm just worried about you. Hearing that, Lai Van Tam secretly came here to find me. Was he worried about my reputation? Thinking so, he nodded and said, I know, thank you. But if you already worship the teacher, then it's not okay. I can't go back on my word. Let's go, so I'll go back. Looking at Lai Van Tam passing by the person he wanted to go, Ku Jia Han quickly grabbed his shirt, hesitantly speaking, it's okay to go back on your words. If you're shy, I can help you say it. You can go to my destination. Our house. Just saying this, Ku Jia Han felt Lai Van Tam suddenly startled. Then she saw him hugging her tightly and rushing away. She asked in confusion, what was going on? Lai Van Tam did not answer, hugged Ku Jia Han tightly and hid behind a big tree. I saw in the distance, a tall man holding a sword jumping out of nowhere. This man glanced at the tree, said in a cold voice, oh, there are still 2 kids in the net. Who are you? Ku Jia Han rushed out first. Her hand opened and a small knife immediately appeared in her hand. She looked warily at the person in front of her. This guy turned his head slightly, he had one eye, pointed his sword and threatened in a cold voice, I advise you to be a little more obedient, don't be invited to drink and then drink as punishment. Looking at the sword in this man's hand, Lai Van Tam thought in horror, this sword is exactly the same as those 2 Taoists, could it be that they are the same sect? Ku Jia Han's eyes were red with anger. She turned slightly and said to Lai Van Tam, I held him back and he quickly returned to call my father. Lai Van Tam worriedly said, don't be shaken, his cultivation level is not simple. Just saying this, the other person seemed to have lost all patience. He waved his sword and shouted, stop whispering, or I'll cut off one of your legs first, so you can't find a way to escape. Seeing the blade about to swing down, Lai Van Tam hugged Ku Jia Han tightly and shouted, wait a minute. The other person's sword still did not stop and slashed down loudly. He quickly took a step forward, protecting Ku Jia Han behind him. The blade stabbed straight into his eye, only a few millimeters away. Stop, the one-eyed man happily said. Oh, what? Block the sword for the little lover. Ku Jia Han said in the back with fear and tears in his eyes, why are you fighting so hard? On the contrary, Lai Van's heart was very calm. He pushed aside the sharp sword tip, smiled and said, Sir, you misunderstood. Your skill is strong. We give up." Giving in, the one-eyed man asked doubtfully. Lai Van Tam took the small knife in Ku Jia Han's hand, presented it to him, and said respectfully, "This is for you, I hope you will be merciful. HMPH, knowing your identity and destiny, follow me." The one-eyed man picked up the knife and turned around to leave. Ku Jia happily waited for the other person to leave before asking in confusion, "Brother, why are you like this?" Lai Van Tam did not answer this question but pointed to one side and said, "Look at the other side of the mountain." Ku Jia Han watched, only to see that his target was being controlled. Lai Van Tam continued to say, "He has accomplices, we can't escape." Ku Jia Han bowed his head sadly and thought, "That's right, I couldn't run away, so I definitely didn't resist." The two people followed the one-eyed man back to the camp to rest. When a lion saw the two coming back, he angrily scolded them. "It's just appearance, I thought there was a man around, at least he could protect the young lady from escaping." Hearing that, Lai Van Tam scratched his head and said, "I am not as good as you." Hearing these words, that Master Chu became even angrier, reached out to pull Ku Jia Han over to him, then shouted at Lai Van Tam, "Come here, don't follow him anymore, the only useless thing is the appearance." Lai Van Tam did not pay attention to these words. He glanced at the people around him and thought, although these swordsmen were not as good as the two previous Taoists, they were much stronger than the masters, even though they were young masters. My mother has not yet taught me the painter's techniques, but he didn't delay in tempering the foundation. If the air sea hadn't been blocked by those two Taoists, he might still be able to fight, but for now. Thinking of this, a swordsman escorted two lion masters to a cart and shouted, "Come again, burn all this goods, then follow us." The two masters thought they heard wrong and stammered, What? Seeing this, Ku Don Hong quickly walked out, clasped his hands and said, "Ha Ku Don Hong of Hong Fu Chu Department in Lac Than. Being respected by our friends from the streets, we call it a Ti Shui knife today, friends. If you want to burn these things, just burn him. But if your friends want something or are looking for something, just say so. Okay, if I can help you." Without letting him finish his sentence, the scar-faced swordsman shouted angrily, "Shut up, and if he dared to say another word, he would die." When Ku Don Hong heard that, she gritted her teeth in anger and did not say anything more. "Burn it, don't hesitate." With just one sentence like that, all the carts of the Hong Fu Bureau were burned, and the blazing fire flared up, illuminating the entire forest. Looking at this scene, Lai Van Tam had a terrible thought. It seemed they were not targeting goods, but people of the target department. They want to save lives. The group had gone a while when the one-eyed man raised his hand and said, temporarily stopping. Hearing this, Ku Don Hong raised his voice and ordered the masters to rest a bit before starting a fire. The group of masters quickly gathered together to build a fire. Lai Van Tam wanted to go over there and help but was stopped. "What are you doing? This is not your place, step aside." Hearing this, he felt a bit sad and had to sadly turn away. Ku Jia Han's eyes followed his figure. "Was scolded by a lion master next to me. Why look at him? What's the use of looking handsome? I feel that kid is planning something." The whole journey was good. But after meeting he encountered these evil things again, and until now he was still walking around, not knowing what he was listening to. Pausing for a moment, he glanced at those swordsmen, cautiously said, "The leader said, these swordsmen are very evil. But if the situation is not right, the only way is to resist to the end." Unable to let outsiders get involved, Lai Van Tam bent down and picked up a tree branch to scribble on the ground. A moment later, the old man came from afar and looked at him and said, "This time it's over. I encountered a strong person. I really shouldn't get on this bus. I'm afraid this old man's life will be handed over." "Not sure." Lai Van Tam frowned and said. Hearing this, Old Man Lu asked incredulously, Do you have a solution?" Lai Van Tam turned her head slightly and asked in a low voice, "Do you know the Kamyda Ha map?" Hearing this name, Old Man Lu raised his voice and stammered, How do you know?" "It is said that the Brocade Wynite map is the work of a master painter." Sketch of the king wearing a golden dragon robe, traveling 300 miles at night to pay his respects to his deceased wife. The ground here, if viewed from above, has been sketched out into a gradually complete portrait. Lai Van Tam stood up and looked at his work, then said to the old man next to him, "I'm almost done painting and need someone to help me with something." The swordsmen were gathering together, Lai Vantam slowly walked over, clasped his hands and said, "Gentlemen, here Lai Vantam is a stray, not in the same group as those bodyguards. I have been to the south and north, but I have never met heroes with high martial arts skills like you. I have always admired the great people in the world. If I do not criticize you, I am willing to lose all my fortune to be able to associate with the heroes." When the scar-faced guy heard this, he angrily lifted his foot and kicked Lai Vantam's body, shouting, "Wants to make friends with us? Are you worthy? Go away. Obediently go back and stay there." Lai Vantam quickly dodged the kick and tremblingly said, I know. A lion master saw this scene and frowned in confusion and said, "Is there something wrong with that kid's brain? They don't even pay attention to the money of the bureau, yet they were planning to use money to bribe him." At this time, Lai Vantam pointed his finger at the group of people from the Blessing Bureau and hesitantly said, "Heroes, can we discuss a bit? I don't want to be crowded together with them. Can you let me find a place to stop?" The more the scar-faced guy listened, the angrier he became. His eyes turned red and he pulled out his sword and shouted, "Didn't you hear what I said? Go back and obediently stay there, don't talk anymore." Lai Vantam turned around and shouted in panic, "Hero, spare your life." But it was the turning of the legs just now that successfully completed the Brigade Y night travel map. Lai Vantam glanced at Old Man Lu. He understood and thought to himself, "It's my turn." Old Man Lu remembered what Lai Vantam told him earlier, "My air sea is sealed. The last step of transferring spiritual energy. I need someone's help to complete. Wait for my signal. When I complete that painting, will be marked by the person who comes. Your little guy, I didn't expect that." At that time Old Man Lu thought to himself like that. Then he laughed and said, "This is easy to say, but if you want to do it, you can easily lose your life." Putting an end to this train of thought, Old Man Lu quickly walked over from afar, clasped his hands and said, Hero, don't be angry." In the lower mixed atoms of the mysterious cave, the sect's face turned sour. Before he could finish his sentence, another swordsman pointed his knife straight at him and asked in a loud voice, "To the Xuan sect, Dao Thong?" Old Man Lu raised his hand to block the tribulation's nose, nodded and said, "Almost like that. The poor Taoist cultivating the profound Dharma was taught by the supreme human being. The Taoist sects in the world are originally from the same family. They're all the same people. Don't fight, kill." As he spoke, his feet moved at a certain pace. Feeling that it was time, he lightly touched his foot to the ground. "Okay," Old Man Lu thought to himself, sweating, then grabbed Lai Vantam next to him, smiled and said, "You gentlemen, just rest well, I'll bring back the brat who doesn't know this." As soon as the words ended, a sword slashed between the old man's legs. He screamed in horror and fell backwards. I just heard the scar-faced guy shout impatiently, "If you dare to talk any more, don't blame me for being heartless." Seeing this, Lai Vantam quickly helped Old Man Lu up, held out his hand and said, Go now. Old Man Lu was pulled away and asked in a low voice, "Was it any use?" Being so timid, he lost half his old life. Not paying attention to the two Lai Vantam people anymore, the group of swordsmen gathered together to chat. The one-eyed guy asked, "I don't know when the leader will send the news. I really want to take advantage of the early morning to bring some guys." Just saying this, a paper crane carrying news flew from somewhere. But Lai Vantam had dragged Old Man Lu to the group of lucky people. A lion master saw this and said in disgust, "It's not like he doesn't want to live with us. Why did he come back?" Lai Vantam smiled and replied, "They are all wanderers, don't pay attention to the details." Hearing that, Master Tu became even angrier and shouted, "Who is the one wandering with you?" The scarred man grabbed the paper crane, saw that the place was too noisy, shouted, "Shut up, and stop arguing." Seeing that the surroundings had quieted down, he opened the paper crane. Lai Vantam and the group of lion masters all glanced warily over. Reading through the information that was transmitted, the scarred man radiated murderous aura around his body and said in a harsh voice, "These people are useless, kill them all." Hearing that, a few swordsmen behind him immediately pulled out their swords and said in displeasure, "What a trouble, many people, tormented for more than midnight, why did they say they don't need it anymore?" Seeing that the other side was starting to attack, Ku Donghong raised a hand and said in a serious voice, "They are really planning to start. I will take action to stop them, letting the children escape first." This group of swordsmen approached with murderous aura. Lai Van Tam quickly took a few steps forward, blocking the group of lucky people. He raised his eyebrows and said in a cold voice, "You guys, there's no need to hide anymore. Who are you and why do you want to kill us?" When a lion heard that, he couldn't keep calm and shouted, "You idiot, do I have to explain to you if I want to kill you?" The scar-faced guy didn't think so. He raised his hand and smiled a few times in amusement and said, "Ha, that's good. So you can also be a demon and understand, come to the underworld, don't give the wrong name, of our 6 brothers. The 6 of us brothers are 6 ghosts in the middle of the river, in the 72 caves, the subordinate of the right man, a close disciple of the Lang Zhu sword sect, was ordered to help the elder save the tribulation." "Damn it," the master shouted in horror. Feeling the Brocade Night March map gradually being activated, Lai Van Tam raised his eyebrows and said in a cold voice, "So that's it? The heroes who rely on the great sect are considered to be thriving, but the murderous hell? It sounds like it would take quite a few human lives. Wealth does not return. Like a silk shirt at night, no one knows about it." The scar-faced man from the Green Ghost River raised his sword. His voice was filled with contempt. "Today, you don't have to feel sorry. Even if you don't have a relationship with the elder, we will. I will let you die quickly and painlessly. Later, wait until the elders have killed enough people. You are also considered to have contributed to helping the elder overcome tribulation. When the 6 of us are given spirit pills by the immortal, we will also remember you." When Ku Don Hong heard this, his face wrinkled. He furrowed his eyebrows and thought to himself, "There are 6 ghosts in the middle. I heard that the 6 of them were killed by a black knife. How come they have disappeared?" He had been undercover for 2 or 3 years, and now he declared his identity in front of this teenager. At this time, Old Man Lu put his hands behind his back, his fingers created a spell and began to mumble, "The 3 king saints, the gods are high, the immortal masters are above, protecting the disciples, can overcome through today's disaster." As soon as these words finished, his fingertips began to release a flash of spiritual energy. Ku Don Hong, standing behind, saw it and exclaimed in surprise, "Is that a magic trick?" He turned his head to look at Lai Van Tam's upright back and thought to himself, that young man could be so calm. Perhaps they had used the Dharma, perhaps there was still a chance to survive. Just thinking of this, the scar-faced guy on the other side suddenly angrily shouted 2 hateful words. But immediately he quickly covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes filled with tears and sadly said, "We 6 brothers had to endure so much hardship to get to where we are today. Before, there was only a small black swordsman. Could have forced us to leave Ha Trung, being hunted and killed to the end. And now, we have met the immortal leader and given the sword companion pill. Just 1 spirit pill mixed with the fairy water, divided into 6 parts, is enough to increase our brother's strength." The scarred man laughed like a madman, then pressed his scarred face close to Lai Van Tam's face and shouted, "When this is over, we will receive a gift from the elder, ha ha ha. We will definitely make that black swordsman, and those who dare to look down on us, kneel before us and beg for forgiveness." A lion master saw this scene and asked suspiciously, why did they suddenly turn into different people?" Ku Don's face was red with sweat and he cautiously said that it was a master using magic. Hearing his words, Lai Van Tam covered her mouth and turned her head slightly to whisper, "That formation that the master just set up, can make them confused is already the limit, you should not act rashly. Otherwise they will immediately wake up." Hearing this, Master Chu was horrified and thought to himself, that boy and the old man did not expect that he really had the ability. Ku Don Hong also approached old Dao Lu, clasped his hands politely and said, "Old immortal elder, I have eyes that cannot see Tai Sun. On the way, I always look down on a mortal elder. Only thanks to a mortal elder's blessing was I able to find a way of life. From now on we will listen to the elders." When old Dao Lu heard this, he was startled and cried out in surprise, then heard Ku Don Hong lean closer and whisper, "Should I take advantage of this moment?" Lu Lao Dao quickly shook his head in understanding and said, It's not urgent. My disciple is leading him deep into the formation, don't act hastily." Having said this, he turned to ask Lai Van Tam, what to do next. He did not answer this question, but furrowed his eyebrows and thought to himself, these 6 people in the mouth of the Ling Zhu sword sect leader are probably the fellow monks of the 2 Taoists who are pursuing me, if they fall into their hands. I'm afraid that I will be more evil and less good. These 6 names cannot be kept. But I can't take action directly. This brocade outfit is not perfect. It can only let the people in the formation immerse themselves in illusory glory, not to the point of being completely bewitched and lose themselves. There is only one way. You can make a bet. Behind him, Ku Donghong began to remind his people, that old Taoist seemed to be a capable person. You kids should go ahead, leaving a few people with good kung fu to help. A monk who heard this disagreed and said, I want to stay. Ku Donghong stretched out his hand to stop her and said in a strict voice, don't stop him. Lai Van Tam had now walked towards the scar-faced man who was immersed in the glory of illusion, smiling and said, Hero, that immortal elder's medicine is so magical, 1/6 of it can help you bravely. So strong, if you can drink all 6 parts, then maybe you can become an immortal. You, Scarface, heard that and your face turned pale. Listening to Lai Van Tam continue to say, I have always paid attention to this group of people. I still admire you the most. Perhaps the leader also values heroes the most, right? If I can follow the leader and learn fairy magic, that's really different from other people, so admirable. Hearing these flattering words, the scarred man happily laughed and said, ha ha ha, of course. Not stopping there, Lai Van Tam continued to speak, but, why do I hear that you are only the second old man in the group? I really don't understand clearly. Clearly they all rely on you. There is only one person. It's only when we are weak that we choose to gather and rely on each other, but they don't know that they are relying on you. You have the title of Green Ghost in the galaxy, but who are you? No one in the world knows your name. So how can you make others take it seriously? Seeing the face of the person in front of him begin to change, Lai Van Tam leaned closer. Words like hypnosis continued to come out. This is not possible. This is not allowed. You have a chance, to your reputation truly flies high, resounding throughout the world. He walked past him, his eyes carrying a sharp look, coldly asking, that's right, what's your name? Tran Dian, the scar-faced guy immediately said, I call myself Tran Dian. Lai Van Tam heard the name of the scar-faced guy, quickly patted his shoulder, his face filled with danger. He said in a cold voice, go away, Tran Dian, let this name be known to everyone, first. Your face is an obstacle. As long as they're there, you will forever be just the second old ghost in the middle of the 6 ghosts. Resounding in the world, these 4 words echoed in Tran Dian's ears. He was completely hypnotized, picked up his sword and headed straight towards the remaining 5 people of the 6 ghosts. Lai Van Tam contentedly curled his lips and thought, just needed a good start. But at this moment an incident happened. A red damask shirt appeared from nowhere right behind the Lion Master. He was startled and cried out in horror, Demon. Tran Dian was swinging his sword to slash at the other 5 people when he suddenly woke up. The one-eyed man quickly shouted, Old man, you. Tran Dian took back his sword and shook his head and said, I don't have it. He looked around cautiously and shouted angrily, there are experts forming a battle, kill them first. Seeing that the situation was not good, Lai Van Tam quickly grabbed old Taoist Lu and pulled him away. The group of green ghosts in the middle of the river angrily waved their swords and shouted loudly. Not even one of them was left behind. On top of a tree branch, a headless corpse wearing red brocade, with 10 pointed fingers, cried out in a dark voice, what a miserable death I died. A head rolled under the feet of 6 people of the 6 ghosts in the middle of the river. Tran Dian alertly shouted, what? The dark voice continued to sound, give me my head, give it back to me. The human head rolled around and turned over, a bloody rotten face appeared, the sound came from its mouth full of red teeth. The headless demon wearing red damask crawled on the ground, raising the table with sharp claws. The group of people in the middle of the 6 ghosts looked at this scene and exclaimed in fear, Ghost. Lai Van Tam, who was running away, turned his head slightly and thought, familiar ghost movie style. Ku Jia Han in the back frowned worriedly and said, in front recently I heard about that strange monster appearing. Lai Van Tam didn't pay attention to these words. He continued to be immersed in thought. He didn't expect that there really were ghosts. I'm afraid there were other strange things in this forest. Unfortunately, although this demon accidentally helped me escape, the formation has also been broken, and I still have to find a way to deal with those 6 guys. The headless demon still slowly crawled towards the group of people in the middle of the 6 ghosts. Tran Dian angrily swung his sword, slashed it, and shouted loudly. A group of cowards, just the kind of ghosts who don't dare to meet people, chase after them. If there's one left, don't blame me for being rude. Ku Jia Han and the Lion Master were hiding behind a bush. The Lion Master was worried in his heart. Why did he let himself have to encounter this? But with his mouth he still reassured Ku Jia Han, don't be afraid. Wait a minute, no one else is here, then we'll leave together. Ku Jia Han nodded and said, fourth brother, are you okay? It's okay, let's go, quickly, Master Chu gritted his teeth and said. But right at this moment, a blinding ray of light swept across Ku Jia Han's face. A swordsman found the location of the two people. He raised his sword and slashed straight at the Lion Master. Ku Jia Han exclaimed in horror, fourth brother, be careful. But it was too late. The sharp sword slashed down on the fourth brother, a terrible scream rang out, and blood splattered everywhere. The swordsman said contemptuously, run, see where you can run to. The fourth brother, Ku Jia Han, screamed until her voice was lost. Hot blood splattered on her face. She opened her eyes to look at the fourth brother's body collapsed in front of her. Lai Van Tam, standing not far away, saw this scene and sighed, thinking, why did I let this happen to me? If I had seen it, I couldn't help but save it, otherwise it would affect my state of mind. Clearly, thinking like that, he immediately picked up his pen, took out a roll of white paper, spread it on the ground, lightly drew a few lines, then waved his hand and shouted, leaving. The scroll carried a layer of spiritual energy and flew towards Ku Jia Han. At this moment, she was being grabbed by the swordsman's hair. He viciously put the blade close to her neck and said faintly, what a pity for such a tender girl, go die. Ku Jia Han stammered in fear, don't. This guy was about to attack when two cold sounds of silence rang in his ears. He angrily turned his head and scolded, mother, let it go. But when he saw the person behind him, he exclaimed in surprise, second brother, why are you here? Did the elder tell you anything else? Tran Dian moved her lips and said something. The swordsman didn't hear clearly, so he loudly asked again, what are you saying a little louder? Is this girl still effective? Tran Dian didn't say anything but still stood there with a serious face. Only then did the swordsman realize something was wrong. He opened his eyes wide and felt a breath of air hitting him. This aura was from Lai Van Tam. He tightly grasped the sword and stabbed it hard into the swordsman's back. But he seemed prepared and quickly dodged to the side, causing the tip of the sword to graze Ku Jia Han's waist. He threw her aside and said contemptuously, his tricks were sketchy and he didn't know how to measure himself. Who would have thought that Li Van Tam would suddenly disappear in front of him? A storm arose. Sensing danger, the swordsman said in horror, okay. Right at this moment, a sharp tree trunk controlled by the cloud of mind rushed down from above the swordsman's head. This time, he was completely caught off guard and was crushed on the spot by that huge tree trunk. After dealing with this guy, Lai Van Tam went to where Ku Jia Han was unconscious, picked up the short sword that had fallen next to her and called out, go quickly, this place is not safe. Ku Jia Han immediately woke up when she heard the call. Her eyes opened wide and she said suspiciously, I'm still alive. Lai Van Tam pulled Ku Jia Han and ran quickly through the forest to escape the pursuit of the 6 ghosts. At this time, Tran Dian had already walked next to the crushed body lying on the ground and blurted out the words 4 brothers. He held the sword and turned around, looked around, then gritted his teeth and said, it's that kid. At this moment, little 4 Lai Van Tam was hiding behind a big tree with Ku Jia Han. He glanced at the tree trunk and said worriedly, something was wrong. When the family member heard that, he immediately asked, what was wrong? Lai Van Tam pointed to the cut on the tree and said, this is the mark one carved, originally intending to set up an additional formation while running away, letting those people get lost deep in the forest, but this is the second time we see this symbol. Feeling a thin curtain covering this forest, Lai Van Tam furrowed her eyebrows in caution, thinking, there is something else that wants to trap us, or it can be said that it just wants to trap us. Ku Jia Han next to her saw Lai Van Tam's pale face drenched in sweat and worriedly asked, are you okay? What should we do next? He didn't answer but turned to look at her sadly and thought, sigh, the little girl was in her teens. If she was still school-age now, being able to come here would not have been very easy. Thinking of that, Lai Van Tam immediately placed his hand on Ku Jia Han's head and comforted him, saying, although we have killed a swordsman, there are still people trying to chase us. I know it will be difficult, but next you have to go yourself. Forward. When Ku Jia-han heard that, he raised his head in shock to look at Lai Van Tam and said, "Go on your own, what about you?" He glanced to one side and said, "I have a way to deal with them. Fortunately, they have already split up their actions. If we can eliminate one more person, your father, they will have some chance of survival." Hearing these words, Ku Jia-han was silent for a moment, then she made up her mind to say, "Okay, I know, you have to be careful." Lai Van Tam stuck a talisman on his back like a family member and said softly, "Good boy, go quickly." Looking at the amulet behind her back, Lai Van Tam began to raise her hand to chant the spell, "Peach branches break the obstacle, go away." Ku Jia-han walked steadily forward step by step. Lai Van Tam behind him softly warned, "Don't look back." Waiting for Ku Jia-han to go a little further away, he took out a painting, his eyebrows furrowed tightly as he thought, "You're gone. Even though I don't want to get involved with him, there's no other way right now, just wait a little longer." Just thinking of this, there was a sound of the sword rushing out of its sheath. Ku Jia-han was walking when he heard this sound, so he quickly turned around and shouted a warning, "Be careful, there's someone." But when she looked clearly behind, she saw no one. Lai Van Tam had disappeared without realizing it. She exclaimed in horror, there was no one." At this moment, suddenly a cold blade appeared from afar and roared and pierced Ku Jia-han's head. Blood splashed. She died without closing her eyes and fell to the ground. Lai Van Tam looked at this scene, unable to hide the sadness in her eyes. She sadly said, "Silly girl, I told you not to turn around." Tran Dian slowly walked over. His eyes revealed murderous intent and said in a cold voice, "My fourth brother, you killed him, right? You also have some of those tricks." Lai Van Tam was extremely angry at this time. He looked at the painting in his hand, raised his other hand to transmit a stream of spiritual energy, his teeth clenched together, thinking, "The person is already dead, so there is no need." Wait. But right at this moment, a cold and gloomy voice came down from above. Where did the arrogant person come from, daring to cause trouble in this lady's palace? Lai Van Tam glanced around for a while, feeling a little colder and thinking, where is this sound? He ran quickly towards a bush. The aura in this sound was exactly the same as the aura that the female ghost emitted before. Maybe this was an opportunity. In another place in the deep forest, a woman named Bark Van Tam was riding a donkey and her maid slowly walked beside her. Bark Van Tam suddenly smelled the scent radiating around and said, "It smells really good over there. Let's go take a look." Lai Van Tam's maid with a white face and red lipstick on her mouth heard her master say that and sighed and said, "Miss, a few days ago you said you had never seen a monkey circus. We have to run to the day I first saw it." The speaker had never heard the story before. "We spent a day and a half listening to the story of the Dragon King at the tea house. The other day, you said you wanted to eat rice cakes. We've been waiting in Weicheng for lake merchants all day. Now, miss, you also want to go to Weicheng to see the Lantern Festival. We're about to be late." Seeing her maid talking for such a long time, Bark Van Tam blushed and shyly replied, "But it was really very fragrant." The maid let out a sigh and could only helplessly lead the white cloud heart to the place where the fragrance was emitting. "When we arrived, we saw a pile of ruins and a stench emanating from it. The maid immediately covered her nose with her hand and said, 'It's too stinky, robbers are attacking, I'm afraid everyone's dead, what's so good about it?'" Bark Van Tam stared at the ruins with interest and said, "Don't look at the outside. This place used to have people with a very pleasant smell." Saying so, she controlled the donkey and moved forward, saying, "Let's go, let's find it together." Hearing that, the maid had to follow. After walking a short distance, she saw a grave of a bloody human head under her feet. The maid screamed in panic. Walking here, her shoes were dirty. Hearing that, Bark Van Tam turned around and smiled brightly and said, "Dirty is dirty, hurry up, I'm about to smell him." Lai Van Tam ran as fast as she could, deep into the forest to escape Tran Dian's pursuit. Stopping for a moment to look at the surrounding scenery, Lai Van Tam said with a sigh of relief, "I can cut off the chase for now." After a few more steps, a temple appeared in front of him. He raised his head slightly to observe the sign and said, "Tam Hoa Nung Nung Temple." Lai Van Tam looked at the temple for a moment, then frowned and said, "It doesn't look like a proper temple." Having said that, he still stepped inside the temple, cautiously saying, "But maybe this is the place, what exactly did it lead me here for?" Just a few steps inside, suddenly there was a blinding light, a dark voice came out, and he knelt down. Lai Van Tam was stunned and made a confused noise. At this moment, I heard a sharp bell ringing, followed by a white cat wearing a red flower on its head. It slowly walked out. It opened its mouth to say, "Who is this person?" Seeing this god, he did not quickly kneel down. The cat crossed his short arms, raised his eyes and continued, asking the deity if he would bring 3 sacrifices. Hearing these words, Lai Van Tam immediately stopped walking, faintly said, "No," then he waved his hand back and said calmly, "Then I'm leaving." The cat saw that and angrily shouted at Lai Van Tam's face, "My God's Taoist school is a place where you can come if you want to go you can go. Just a Dan King Taoist who dares to disrespect me." Lai Van Tam smiled and raised his hand to say, of course he didn't dare. Seeing that Lai Van Tam's hand was about to touch her, the cat was startled and shouted 2 bold words. It was extremely angry and tried to scratch Lai Van Tam's hand with its claws. But he was many times faster than it, pulled it close to him, squeezed its neck and threatened it, a small love cat, with a stomach that was not small at all. The cat was sweating and struggled violently. It screamed, "Ha, dear cat, where are you? I'm Tam Hoa Princess." Lai Van Tam raised Tam Hoa Nung and looked straight at its face and said faintly, "Stop struggling, this title is yours." "Isn't Tam Hoa Nung a calico cat? You can't transform yet, right? So it can only enter the earth statue." Lai Van Tam forcefully squeezed Tam Hoa Nung and said in a cold voice, "Little cat, as long as you help me deal with those people out there, if you want to eat meat, you can smoke incense." Tam Hoa Niang used her legs to press against Lai Van Tam's face and protested, but she didn't care. Hearing this, Lai Van Tam showed a fierce face threatening Tam Hoa Princess. He said every word, "Then it's a pity. I intend to teach you something more fun than pretending to be a girl. Devil 1,000 times." Hearing Lai Van Tam say that, Tam Hoa Nung immediately opened her eyes and happily said, More fun? What kind of fun is that?" Lai Van Tam saw the cat's attitude turn 180 degrees and secretly thought, the female ghost was indeed disguised by him. Although this little cat demon was intelligent, his temperament was still young. If you still keep your nature, it's too easy to deceive. Who would have thought that at this moment, Tam Hoa Nung would suddenly angrily wave her claws and say, "No play." Lai Van Tam held it away. It shouted angrily again, "There are no 3 sacrifices." Well, suddenly the lady doesn't want to help you, unless. Lai Van Tam has doubts and asks again. Tam Hoa Nung felt guilty and timidly said, "Unless, give this highness a body." Looking at Tam Hoa Nung's sweaty face, Lai Van Tam thought, no wonder this demon cat clearly pointed out that I was a Dan Than Taoist as soon as I met her, so it turns out it's because of this. Goblins and monsters can cultivate mental magic power, but cannot create magic methods to temper their bodies. Sometimes when the body dies, the spirit consciousness is immortal, becoming something like a human ghost. When dead, this is the spirit body, and the spirit body is extremely weak, without a body or a spirit object that can send it to it. So even if it's a normal electric thunderstorm during the rain, it can cause it to lose its soul. If something is asked of me, then it's easy to handle. Thinking so, Lai Van Tam looked at Tam Hoa Nung and said, "You help me solve the immediate problem. I will kill someone and take care of the body later. The body and the incense are not a problem." Tam Hoa Nung still hesitated and stammered, "But, her body." Lai Van Tam saw that he still refused to agree, and made a fierce face that made Lady Tam Hoa break out in sweat. He said in a cold voice, "But the little devil dares to give me conditions, don't you? Do you know that I am a Dan King Taoist? If you accept, later, I will draw a picture for you to enter, find a shrine to worship at your convenience, you can enjoy incense, and cultivating righteous fruit is also possible." Tam Hoa Nung's mind was a little moved by imagining her portrait painted with incense and fire. She hesitantly asked, "So, what you said is fun?" Lai Van Tam raised his hand and whispered in Tam Hoa's ear, "Come here, listen to me, do you know?" Outside, Tran Dian was still searching for Lai Van Tam's whereabouts. He touched the ground with his hand, then brought it up to his nose to smell it, thinking to himself, the traces are gone at this point. Tran Dian looked at Tam Hoa Nung Nung temple in front of him and said suspiciously, Are you hiding in the temple? Standing there wondering for a moment, he thought he was very smart, afraid that he was a coward, wanted to hide in the temple to seek the protection of gods and Buddhas. Holding the sword firmly in his hand, Diane's bare body radiated a strong murderous aura. As he entered the temple, he thought to himself, now, you can't escape anymore.